Learning objectives are very important. They are used as a set of guidelines for your study and training requirements in Section 2. View, practice, and duplicate each learning objective until you can develop your own level of proficiency. This learning objective, the new student, demonstrates how to draw a wooden sword, a bokuto, your stances, and your 5-strike kihon. Let's begin on how to draw a sword. First, bring it over to your side. I'm going to stand straight dead in, arms to your side, lift my elbows. No, you don't lift your elbows. You bend your elbows. A lot of people have a tendency to lift their elbows out this way. But what I'd like you to understand is if you just bend at the elbows and bring your arms up, they naturally go into your V foundation and this triangle here. When I demonstrate bending at the elbow and bringing my arms inward, you can see that I can easily grasp the handle of the wooden sword. At this angle, at this angle, at this angle. There are a few things I want you to also take in consideration. When you do bend your arms at the elbow and lift your arms up this way, I would like you to take and turn the sword depending on which angle you're going to cut or draw the sword. At this time, we're going to be drawing at about 45 degrees. Even though we don't have a sheath, we are going to learn your basic footprint on how to draw a sword this way. Drop my arms at the side, bending at the elbows. I bring both arms up, creating my triangle, and then I grasp the sword. A lot of times when you grasp the sword, you're going to bring your arm over on this side, opening up this whole area. Note, if you bring both arms in equally, it will create this triangle in the center of your body. So when you do execute any technique, it will come off the top of your head instead of one side compared to another, where you would be left or be put into difficulty from your openings. After I drop my arms down, bending again at the elbow, I lift up. I grasp onto the sword. My hand is like this instead of like this. This will allow me to manipulate the sword a little easier to the target when I draw it. When gripping the sword, it is very important to not grip it like you're skydiving or you're going to be falling off a bridge and you're going to grab it with all your might. I want you to grab it a little bit softer and use a little bit more dexterity. When you bring your elbows up and you grasp the sword, I want you to grasp it with a little air in between here instead of grasping really hard. Now, I've said this twice, so it must be very important. Upon grasping the sword, I immediately let go with my left hand and bring it over to the side and rotate the sword approximately 180 degrees until the point is away from me. To do opposite and sheathe the sword is just reversed engineering. I bring the sword back 180 degrees, I grip the side of the handle here, or the sword itself, and I just bring it down to my side. Important note, if you have a sword and it has a sheath, you sheath it. If you're using a piece of wood, such as a bokken or bokuto, it doesn't have a sheath. So regrip at where the blade would be. You wouldn't hold a sword here, a real one, because it has a sheath there. But since this doesn't require a sheath, instead of trying to hold it at the handle like many people do, feel down the blade a little bit where you can feel where, oh, there's the handle, and this is where the blade begins. Grasp the bladed area with a wooden bokuto. That way, when you're practicing the basic footprint, you don't have to worry about all the subtleties at first. We can work on the subtleties then when we use metal. Bending at the elbow, I bring the sword up, I grasp, I release with my left hand, I bring it back over to my side, I rotate the blade forward, the point in front of me, and then my hand that's sitting idle here, see my left hand? It will easily reach out and re-grip the bottom part of the handle. After I've reached out, repositioned, and re-gripped the handle, now I can execute any cut, or bring the sword back to sheath it, where I would let go with my left hand, let it sit idle here, grasp it as it comes back, and then work my arms down, bending again at the elbow. Let's practice this until your rote memory sets in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At a different angle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, at a different angle here. Again, at an angle from this area. And of course, right down the front. Practice this over and over until your muscle memory sets in and you become proficient. Did you recognize that every time I drew the sword, it automatically went into a center stance? Stances are also very important on making sure that all your technique is smooth and consistent. When we talk about the different stances, there are 8 basic stances. We use only about 3 most of the time. For example, the center stance is used about 90% of the time. There is a left Jodan stance. This one and the Gedan stance with your sword pointing down at your opponent's knee, those are the main 3 that are used. More of a high, medium, and low stance. Let's go over it in detail. If I bring the sword out into a center stance like this, which is about 95% of the time, or come into a Jodan stance being ready, or coming down into a Gedan stance. As I said earlier, this takes up most all your stances that are used regularly because they're practical. If I was to bring the sword back over here to my left shoulder, this way with my right leg forward, this is called a left hostile position, right where my jawline is. If I want to do an opposite to a right hostile, all I need to do is either turn my body or bring the sword over to the left or the right, depending on where you are in relation to your opponent. Bringing this down to my right side, over to a walking no kamae, or a right downward diagonal stance, or over here to another. This is on the left side. You can see how the sword starts being manipulated from here, over to the center, up to a hasso. I can bring it back down to the center, back down to a gedan, a lower one, or bring it up above my head into a jodan, either a straight or a diagonal one. It all depends on how you are in relation to your opponent and how they see it. From these stances, let's begin to move accordingly. Up to a left jodan, turn into it to a right hasso. I'll turn over to a waki, bring it down for a gedan, bring it over this way for a jodan, turn left in for a left hasso, come in for a chudan kamae, bring it down to a gedan kamae. The whole secret about stances is that you must practice them. You can't just think of a stance and know that your transitioning will be good. You have to practice over and over until you are proficient. Through this proficiency, you'll be able to execute strikes and cutting techniques where your opponent cannot see it. This next learning objective is your Kihon kata, which consists of 5 basic strikes, or 4 strikes and 1 thrust, which is internationally known in most any sword system. With that, let's start practicing the 5 basic strikes. First, you want to go into a center stance. From the center stance, you want to set the sword up above your head, setting up to execute the strike. From this position, you're going to move forward about a half a step and cast out the sword to head level. Just like that. You'll notice that the sword angle is upward and my arms are parallel to the floor. We'll discuss that in more detail later. If I lift up the sword again for the second strike and I cut down until the blade is parallel to the floor. This shows me that even though I'm cutting a vertical or a Shinshokugiri cut from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock, to be consistent, if I throw out to the head, my arms are parallel. To throw down to the midsection at the same angle, the blade is parallel to the floor. Again, when I lift up the sword and I want to come in for a midsection or mid shot, called a do, basically to this area here, I'm going to work at the same setup I did with the first 2 cuts, but with this one, I'm going to cast out and then come down at a slight angle this way. So, at the first cut was 12 to 6, the second cut was 12 to 6, the third cut is your 1 to 7. It's called a Hidari Keisagiri. It follows the monk's robe. So, for example, if your opponent wore a gi, or a kendogi, or any type of outfit like this one here, where the X is, you would cut down that area, just right down this area here. What happens is, it's your guideline, and it helps you make smoother, stronger cuts. Again, a men shot, up, a kote shot, up, a do shot. And of course, I go back into a center stance. The fourth strike is one called an ashi. It goes to the lower area of one's body. I'm going to be lifting up. I'm going to be cutting from 11 o'clock to 5 o'clock, which is a migi keisagiri, and going opposite of what the do did, just in a little bit more reach, and my body will drop down, like that. After I've completed that cut, and I set up again into a center stance, my last executed technique is a thrust, or a stab. You would know it in Japanese as a ski, where I am at a center stance again, and I move forward, thrusting into the target, and then coming back into a center stance. These 5 basic strikes or cuts are your beginning kata on how to correctly manipulate the blade from one area to another with good timing, speed, and presence. Let me demonstrate this again. I'll take an angled view here, and up, men, up, kote, up, do, up, ashi, and center for ski. Ski! Working on these basic thrusts and strikes, work those into your rote memory. Work them hard, over and over. This is your Kihon. These are your basics. So if you can perfect these sooner, your other techniques will fall into place.